Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Make sure not to miss a single episode and subscribe to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Army War College, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense.
Welcome to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast. My name is Lou Yuengert, and this is another episode in our special series, How Should the Army Run, or HSTAR. Today's episode is about some of the student research efforts on talent management completed in academic year 24. The Army and DoD have promulgated a vision of replacing an industrial-age personnel system based on strength management principles with a 21st century system based on talent management. Today, two students from the Army War College class of 2024 join us after conducting research and publishing papers in support of this talent management effort. First is Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kaiser, a 2002 Air Force Academy graduate and a command pilot with over 1,000 combat hours during deployments between 2005 and 2015, as well as instructor experience training both U.S. and Afghan pilots. Sarah has master's degrees from both Air Command and Staff College and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. She spent her year prior to the War College in the Career Intermission Program, the subject of her research. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Lou. Thanks for having me.
Next is Colonel Jacy Park, an Army chemical officer and a 2001 graduate of the University of Washington, who served twice in Korea, once in support of Operation Enduring Freedom as the NATO Training Mission Afghanistan liaison with ISAF in Kabul, as a professor of military science at Florida International University, and a tour as an assignment officer and executive officer in the chemical branch at Human Resources Command. Jacy has a Master of Science degree in Environmental Management from Webster University. Her research is about the current state of talent management in the Army and the challenges in realizing the people strategy vision. Welcome, Jacy.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to do this today. Okay, we'll start with Sarah. For context, tell us about the Career Intermission Program.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to share about this because overall, it's been an unfamiliar program within the DoD. The Career Intermission Program is a DoD retention tool that supports flexible military service. It's been around since 2009. The Navy first started it in 2009 as a pilot program, and then the other services picked it up in about 2014. So for the Army and for the Air Force, it's been around for over a decade.
Wow. Why did you choose to pursue research on this program?
So like you mentioned in the intro, I did career intermission before attending War College. And that was a choice in my career. I'd already served 20 years, but I wanted to continue my service beyond that. And the Career Intermission Program gave me an opportunity to invest in my family. I had young kids, kindergartners and a baby, and I wanted to invest in them before continuing as a senior leader in the Air Force.
So what was your experience in that program?
So I did the Career Intermission Program after serving in Squadron Command and then Deputy Command. And what the Career Intermission Program is, it's a temporary pause in your active duty service. So a participant will transition from the active duty into the IRR, or the Individual Ready Reserve. So you are changing components from the active component to the reserve component. And this is true for all of the services. And when I was in the reserve component, participants will still, they retain their medical benefits, dental benefits. And that's not just for the service member, it's also for their dependents, which is a really important element of the program. There's also different benefits to include permanent changes of station that are allowed, and then also a small stipend throughout the program. And so these benefits all are in order to help that member return to the active duty at the end of their SIP period. These intermission periods can last from 1 to 3 years, and each service can execute their career intermission program according to what their needs are and the requirements for their own retention. And so some services may focus on certain timelines of a career. The Air Force is actually pretty generous, and they take a do no harm kind of approach. And so that's why I was able to do the program after 20 years of service. That's pretty rare. I might be the only person who's done SIP after 20 years of service. But a lot of the targeted population for this retention tool are those people who are faced with a decision, and they are facing typically a temporary situation that is incompatible with military service, with active duty full-time service. And so the SIP provides them an opportunity to take a pause from that full-time active duty requirement and move into different goals that they might have, be they personal or professional. Some people get degrees. A lot of people, like me, focused on family for that time. And this gives an alternative to permanent separation for those members who are facing choices. And I think that that kind of autonomy is very valuable in today's workforce. And we've seen that in the research as well.
Okay, so when you decided to research the SIP, what approach did you take? Where did you start?
Yeah, this was a big question because my experience was just my experience in the Air Force. But here I am as a student at the Army War College. And as I'm talking to my classmates, they're very unfamiliar with the program. And so I kind of started where I started in the program. I talked to the program manager. I said, hey, do you know anyone else? The program manager who takes care of the participants is actually not the person who's taking care of policy or deciding on how the program should be executed. And so we kept on elevating that until we got to the one staff, and then they are referring me over to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. And so I finally got connected with that office, who manages a large portfolio, but the Career Intermission Program is one of those that they manage. And they were very excited to hear from me, somebody who was interested in looking at it, because they had a lot of access to the data and the reports that they require per Congress. And we were able to collaborate this year in order to look at the data and what is the data going to tell us. And so that was actually a really interesting journey, and finally getting connected to the right office in order to look at it and analyze it and see what the trends were for this as a retention tool. Is it effective? How are we doing with it?
So what did you learn from your research, and especially with working with an office of an Undersecretary of Defense?
Oh, well, they are busy people. And so I think for a student in PME, professional military education, to reach out to them and kind of offer some analysis and some work, they were pretty amenable to that. And they were able to share with me that information and that data. And through that, I also needed to understand how the different services execute the program. Like I said before, as an Air Force officer, I was allowed to take the program after 20 years of service. Many of the other branches limit that to less than that. So maybe capped at 17 years or something like that. And so taking a look at the different policies and how the different services execute the same DoD retention tool program was very interesting. It also kind of uncovered the ways that the different services look at retention and how a program like this may fit or not fit their cultural context within their own organization.
So describe some of the differences between the services and how they execute the program. I mean, you've already talked a little bit about who they would allow to be part of the program. What else did you find that was different between the services and how they did it?
Some of the services target different demographics. If they are specialized skill sets, they could be taken out of eligibility or not. One common theme that is different in the Air Force is there was a lot of services that eliminated people if they were on a promotion list or if they were in in a season in their career where they were going to be looked at for promotion. They didn't want to introduce that kind of a risk, maybe, to their participation and potentially the impact onto their career. And so I think that probably has a negative impact on participation in those other services because you're really limiting the windows that you can apply for the program. Within the Air Force, like I said, they take a do no harm approach, and I was able to apply for the program before a promotion board even met. And so while I was separated from the active duty military, I got a call from my wing commander saying, congratulations, And so that was kind of an aha moment that, okay, the Air Force really does value this program and appreciates flexible service and the different kind of diverse perspectives that it's going to bring to us. When I looked at some of the other services, like the Army and the Marine Corps, they often reflected a hesitancy about the program. Because it's unfamiliar, they were unsupportive and wondering why somebody would try to separate from the military when they could just continue their service. And what I think they weren't understanding was that a SIP participant will be returning to active duty. So it's not disloyalty to the organization. It's actually a stronger commitment, but that commitment is in the future after this flexible intermission period. So just because something is unfamiliar doesn't mean it isn't valuable. A career intermission is divergent from the familiar paths of the past, but I think we need to adopt a new narrative that flexible service is value added to the member and to the military. And these diverse perspectives, experiences, and new skills, a lot of people get education, different degrees. These things are valuable to the military, and they're going to make our team stronger in the future.
So there was a lot of data that you looked at that OSD PNR provided for you. What trends did you find looking at that data?
There were a lot of interesting trends looking at the numbers. And when we looked at the participation rates, this is across the DoD, so we're talking every service, there was disproportionate participation across the services. The Navy and the Air Force had the highest SIP participation, but it was disproportionately lower in the Army and the Marine Corps. And I think that reflects the program unfamiliarity and then possibly that unsupportive service culture to flexible options like an intermission. So one thing that I think is interesting, though, is when I researched this, the Army and the Navy have the longest tradition of intermissions. Even Admiral Nimitz took an intermission, and the Army often, in its history, gave intermissions for people to go get degrees and other life experiences that would strengthen them in their future leadership roles. So that was interesting. Another trend that we saw is that officers were twice as likely to participate in the Career Intermission Program than enlisted service members. And so the data suggests officers value that autonomy and making their own choices, and they also value continued service. These participants would choose to do career intermission, but they're also choosing continued service. And so I think that's something that we should look at when we're trying to figure out strategies and policies for retention in the future. Another thing that the data shows us is that we need more of it. We need to follow these participants throughout their careers to see what the rest of that career looks like after an intermission. Are they still high performers? Are they still contributing to the organization? Where do they go? How much longer do they serve? All of this data is useful. And then another trend that we saw is that women are 3 times more inclined to take SIP compared to men. Women make up 17.5% of the active duty military, but they can constitute 52% of SIP participants. So that's very interesting. And some posit that the SIP was kind of designed in order to allow women to take a break in order to have families. But alternatively, I think that it's also interesting how many men value that program as well, because there is a large amount of men that are taking advantages of the program as well. One other thing that I wanted to hit on is the participation barriers that we discovered. And the top three were administrative challenges, program unfamiliarity, like we've already discussed, and then unsupportive cultures. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about these administrative challenges because they are not insignificant. And personally, going through the program really shed light on some of the problems. And these problems are not just about SIP. It goes beyond a retention program, in the OUSD PNR office. This goes into total force integration because when you are making those transfers between different components in your own branch, you are also transitioning into different administrative systems, and they're incompatible. Some of the services are looking into this with the integrated personnel and pay systems, and that's a good step, but we're not there yet. And so some of those challenges are significant. SIP participants identify gaps and seams in transition, and this creates a substantial hardship not only on the members, but also the support agencies that are trying to help them through that process. It wasn't uncommon for participants to go 4 months until their active duty pay restarted after returning from SIP. One participant spent 10 months to resolve finance issues with back pay and taxes. If this is a retention tool, we have to do better than this.
Okay, so some fascinating research. And I think you really have you certainly enlightened me and a lot of other people who are listening to this program and some of the challenges. What are you recommending to the services?
Yeah, this is why we look at the data, right? We need to find out how to make it better, or is it effective in the first place? And so looking at the data and speaking with people and talking with the program managers, the recommendations are specifically for the services and then also some recommendations for the DoD. So for the services, I think that we need to embrace this new narrative, that we need to adapt and embrace the new context of talent management with today's workforce. It's critical. Like, we're already there. We can't ignore this anymore. The services also need to share best practices and challenges with their other services. And I'm happy to report that OUSD PNR just started doing this with quarterly meetings between the different program offices this year. And that was exciting to see that we are finally getting that crosstalk and that sharing of what their best practices are. Some services have a participation guide that kind of helps participants navigate some of those administrative challenges. And, someone else is coming up comms like, hey, can you send me that? And that was really great to see happening. Another thing is that the services are responsible for collecting and analyzing that kind of data, good standardized data, to best shape strategic decisions about retention. We can't just blindly throw out policies and see what's going to stick to the wall. We need to make these informed decisions based on these trends and the data that we should be collecting. And then for the DoD really does need to take a look at some of these barriers that SIP encounters and see if they can be applied to other elements of what we do as an enterprise. And until we can actually work on that total force integration with seamless systems and that active and reserve component transition is actually smooth, the DoD should consider alternate ways to execute SIP. A permanent process for a career pause is just too painful, given those examples that I shared before. We've got to find a better way for our people and for the military. And I think one solution to that would be establishing a new duty status for these intermissions. And that would address some of the other challenges, not only with the interoperable systems, but also in taking care of our people during that time. So for the enterprise recommendations, when you're talking total DoD, I think that we do need to foster a culture that values these diverse career paths. And we can also optimize SIP to improve that total force integration. I think an important element to take away from this is that normalizing these flexible opportunities is crucial in order to retain the right people so that we can navigate the complex challenges in the future.
Well, those are great thoughts, Sarah, and I really appreciate you coming to talk to us today, and I appreciate you taking some time and thought and effort toward talent management. I'm a big fan. Jacy, thanks for waiting so patiently. Tell us about why you decided to pursue talent management as a topic and how you approached your research.
So I have always thought that the U.S. Army's decisive advantage came from how much we invest in our people. And as a product of this investment and a leader who's been managing my own people's talent, I was fascinated by the Army's new transformation effort. I have actually served in all 4 of the talent management lines of effort: acquire, develop, employ, and retain. But from what I have seen and experienced, the Army's execution of the talent management did not match the senior leader narrative. So while the Army's talent management aims to align talent with the Army's needs, the reality is that it is still operating under the legacy model focused on a very rigid career timelines and an up or out philosophy. So this, along with the ambiguous usage of knowledge, skill, behavior, we call them KSBs now, and increasing officer attrition rate, all seems to suggest that the Army's talent management may not be working properly. So using my experience as a basis, I focused my research on transparency, assuming that was the missing critical element, which in turn inhibited the talent management strategy from achieving its desired goal, namely lack of transparency in selection and promotion processes and candid feedback necessary to facilitate individual and organizational growth.
So while you were doing the research, did it lead you in any unexpected directions?
I did, and I actually ended up changing my thesis soon after I began my research for 2 reasons. So first, after thoroughly examining the Army's vision and its strategy, I actually realized that they were very comprehensive. They took into consideration many lessons learned and best practices from other organizations to optimize the Army's talent so we could become more responsive to the dynamic future environment. Second, I realized that transparency was only one element of the larger structural and cultural issue that was inhibiting the development of sustainable talent-based ecosystem, which I think is required to fully adopt the Army's talent management strategy. So I redirected my effort to identifying the gaps between the strategy and its implementation, and of course, what impact they had on the Army's talent management initiative as a whole. And to do that, I examined Amazon, Google, and Apple to see how other successful large and complex organizations modernize their human resources strategy to achieve their talent management vision. I look for insights to how to manage talent better in the Army using their model as an example.
So that's really interesting that you looked at some very successful commercial companies. A lot of people say military is not a business. I'm not sure we have that much to learn from them. With both your experience and your research, what did you learn from this? From that research, and what did you come away with in terms of conclusions from it all?
So I can conclude that, all 3 companies were looking for a more innovative and transformative talent management strategy, but they all took very different approaches. So Amazon, particularly what I wanted to highlight and included in my research was the inclusion of frequent and candid feedback loop that enabled individual development. And of course, that was linked directly with some sort of compensation. Google used feedback from what they call the people analytics. They were using data and algorithm to promote creativity and management talent. And what was also interesting was that their subordinates actually got to rate their senior raters or raters twice a year. And Apple, they were the most interesting, I thought. They promote innovation through agility to innovate in entirely new areas. And they do this by creating a environment where every single person who works in that company is expected to face a radical change. And the point is to eliminate resistance and sends a message to all of the employees to continuously innovate. And then the second piece is the lean talent management system, basically purposely underfunding and understaffing their members to force them to develop a cohesive team.
I also know as you looked at these companies, they incorporate a lot of their, when they say talent, they're really looking at, they're incorporating performance in that discussion of talent. It's not just some attributes that people have or KSBs is what the Army's using. What did you come away with from that discussion?
I think Apple specifically was focused on performance. In fact, everything a employee was to gain through some sort of status was linked directly to performance. And they were treated differently. They were given bigger offices. Salary was different based on specific performance. The other two companies were more in line with where the Army was going, trying to cultivate and develop talent. And so they could optimize that talent to increase the organizational performance.
Okay, you also took the talent management elective, and you had an opportunity to speak to a number of Army leaders in the talent management community. How did that affect your perspective?
So I think what it did for me was that it confirmed that Army truly did put in a lot of time, resource, and effort in designing the talent management strategy. And my exposure to the various Army leaders showed me that Army will continue to make changes and updates to ensure that we are optimizing talent we have on hand. I don't think we are there yet. All of the Army leaders acknowledge that. There are more work to do, and there are more initiatives taking place to get there.
Okay. Given all that research and that exposure to the Army leaders, what are you recommending to them?
So I actually listed 7 different recommendations in my paper, but I'll just highlight a few here. I think first and foremost, the most important thing that the Army must do is to redefine talent and update its selection promotion process to account for talent to achieve its transformational goal. The current ATAF, the Army Talent Attribute Framework, fails to provide the critical link between talent and the officer's ability to be an effective leader. The updated definition should really combine all factors that define talent the Army is looking for. So the KSB, the unique intersection of KSB inherent in every soldier, which is a new definition for talent, their demonstrated performance, and also the future potential that meets the Army requirement. Second, the Army must prioritize transparency in its systems, processes, and outcomes, specifically in its promotion and selection. Transparency in the process shows the officers how to achieve their goals, enhance the spirit of competitive cooperation, and build trust in the organization. And third, the Army must expand its incentive programs to facilitate retention of its valuable players by linking the reward, the incentives to exceptional performance for those officers in key positions or sensitive positions, high visibility positions, and hard to fill positions by connecting it to some sort of compensation. And lastly, an IT system that allows data-driven HR functions to collect, catalog, differentiate, and track talent-based data must be instituted to enable data-informed management. Only then can we effectively identify talent gaps, take proactive actions to mitigate risks, retain our best talent, and develop strategies to counter anticipated personnel management problems.
Okay, well, I'm gonna ask you a little bit of a different kind of question, but it's certainly related to the entire intent and vision for Army talent management, and that is for those three companies that you looked at, and for the Army, they tend to focus on top talent, on the maybe top 5 to 10% of the people who are involved, and identify them and put them in key positions, where the Army vision is more about, in the words of General McGee at one point, the 6 to 70%. So the rest of the people who have talents, how does what your research and the conclusions you came to, how does that square with that vision of a broader talent management system than just for the top talent?
So Major General McGee's explanation for where the Army's headed is actually in line with some of the experts out there in the field who have shown works to prove that performance-based evaluations and talent management alone does not meet the demands of the dynamic future environment. So optimizing every single person's talent to increase the operational performance makes sense, but the Army is not doing that right now. The Army is still managing its top talent. And even with the Army talent management's initiatives that they've implemented, such as brevet promotion or merit-based promotion, all of those are geared toward a finite number of officers and does not apply to most officers. In order for us to actually achieve the talent management vision that General McGee had described, where every single officer's talent is identified and utilized, we have to be able to collect the talent data, the granular talent data, and so we could match the right officer to the right job at the right time. But studies have shown that only about 60% of the officers are receiving their top 3 choices of assignments. And those assignments are really not based on their KSBs, their talent, what is identified as talent right now, but based on preference. And so we still have a long way to go. But as I mentioned in my last recommendation, that IT system that could collect that data will really help drive the assignment and employment aspect of the talent management.
Well, thanks, Jacy, and I appreciate the depth of the research you did and the very specific recommendations that, if the Army leaders are listening, they have something to chew on, for sure. So thank you for that, and I really have enjoyed discussing talent management with both of you today. Thanks again for sharing this time with us. And that's all the time we have for now. We welcome any suggestions you have on future episodes of How Should the Army Run? Meanwhile, you can access the How the Army Runs reference guide and other texts on matters of Army leadership and management on the War Room site under the Reference Materials tab. I'm Lou Yuengert, signing off from the War Room.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu, and have a great day.